What would you do if you had the gift to see how many days someone had left to live? Would you warn them? Try to change it? Or would you let fate take its course? I never thought I'd have to answer that question, but here's my story. The numbers didn't stop flashing, even when I closed my eyes. At first, I thought it was a bad dream, but when I woke up, they were still there, hanging above people's heads like they were carved out of light. Numbers that told me how many days they had left. Numbers that didn't lie. It started the day I turned 19. I was fetching water from the stream when I first saw them. Numbers glowing faintly above people's heads. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but they wouldn't go away. The numbers moved, ticking down like a clock. I didn't know what they meant. Not at first. Then, I saw a man fall from a tree while harvesting palm fruits. His number had hit 0 just seconds before. That's when it hit me like cold water down my back. These weren't just numbers. They were death dates. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't a dream, and it wasn't a mistake. I could see death coming, and no one else could. The first time it really hit me was on my way to school. I was walking behind our neighbor, Mama Ngozi, when I saw the number 3 glowing faintly above her head. I blinked, thinking it was my imagination, but the number stayed. She was laughing with someone at the roadside, her wrapper tied tight around her waist, like she didn't have a care in the world. How could I tell her? "Good morning, Ma," I muttered, my voice shaky. She smiled and waved, but I couldn't stop staring at the number above her head. I didn't know what it meant then. I didn't know how real it was. 2 days later, Mama Ngozi was hit by a truck at the market. The morning after Mama Ngozi's death, I couldn't shake the image of her lifeless body sprawled on the market road. Her basket of tomatoes had rolled into the gutter, crushed like her. And worse, the number 3 above her head had been real. Too real. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Who would believe me? Even my parents would think I was cursed. But things got worse. I was sitting in class that afternoon, trying to focus on our English lesson, when I saw the numbers again. This time, they floated above the heads of my classmates. Some glowed brightly, large numbers like 198 or 203. Others flickered faintly, almost like a dying candle. 5, 9, 12. I couldn't stop staring. The worst part was that nobody else could see them. They all sat there, copying notes or whispering to one another. I sat frozen in my chair, sweat pooling under my armpits. "Precious!" My teacher's voice snapped me back to reality. "What are you looking at?" "And nothing," Ma, I stammered. Her sharp eyes bore into me, but then something caught my attention. Above her head, the number 7 was flickering faintly. 7 days. My mouth went dry. "Focus, Precious," she said. But how could I? That was the day I realized this wasn't going to stop. For weeks I kept quiet, hoping the numbers would disappear on their own, but they didn't. They only got worse. Everywhere I went, school, church, the market, the numbers hovered over people's heads. When someone's number got close to 0, bad things happened. A boy in my class, Emeka, had 2 over his head. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe he'd be fine. But on the second day, he fell into the village river and drowned. It was like a curse. The worst moment came when I saw the numbers above my parents' heads. My father's was 12. My mother's was 15. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Papa," I whispered that evening as he sat peeling yams in the kitchen. "How are you feeling?" He looked at me, confused. "I'm fine, Precious. Why are you asking?" I wanted to tell him everything. The numbers, the deaths, the way the numbers always came true. But how could I explain something that didn't make sense? So I said nothing. Every day after that, I watched the numbers above their heads tick down. 12 became 11, then 10. The closer the numbers got to 0, the more desperate I became. I couldn't let them die. There was an old shrine deep in the forest, a place nobody in the village dared to go. It was said that the gods there were powerful but angry. People only went there to beg for help in the most desperate situations, and even then they rarely returned. I was desperate. On the 9th day, I left school early and walked into the forest alone. I carried nothing but a small bag of coins, some kola nuts, and a white cloth. My heart raced with every step. The trees grew taller and darker, their branches clawing at the sky. When I reached the shrine, it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick and cold, and the ground was littered with old sacrifices, broken calabashes, burnt feathers, and bones. Who dares disturb the gods? a voice boomed from the shadows. I froze. My hands trembled as I laid the kola nuts and coins on the ground. "Please," I whispered. "I need help. My parents." "Speak no more," the voice roared. The ground beneath me shook. "You seek to change what is written. Do you understand the price of tampering with fate?" "I'll do anything," I said quickly, tears streaming down my face. The voice laughed, a cold, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Anything?" I didn't know what I had agreed to until it was too late. The gods demanded that I prove my devotion by completing 3 trials. If I succeeded, they would save my parents. If I failed, they warned, the consequences would be worse than death. The first trial came that night. I was woken by a voice whispering in my ear, "Go to the river. Do not look back." The river was miles away, and the village was pitch dark. But I couldn't refuse. I wrapped a shawl around myself and slipped out of the house. The journey was terrifying. The trees seemed to move on their own, their branches reaching for me. Strange sounds echoed in the distance. Howls, whispers, laughter. My feet felt heavy, like something was trying to pull me back. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me. I wanted to turn around so badly, but the gods' warning echoed in my head. "Do not look back." When I finally reached the river, the water was black and still. A single calabash floated on its surface. I didn't know what to do, but the voice whispered again, "Take it and leave." I grabbed the calabash and ran. The second trial came the next day. This time, the voice told me to go to the old cemetery at midnight. I didn't want to go. The cemetery was said to be haunted, and the cemetery was at the edge of the village, a place nobody dared to visit at night. But I had no choice. My parents' numbers were ticking down, and I could feel time slipping away like sand through my fingers. That night, as the village fell into silence, I snuck out of the house again. The path to the cemetery was overgrown, and the tall grass brushed against my legs as I walked. My lantern cast flickering shadows on the ground, and every sound made my heart jump. When I reached the gates, the voice returned, colder and harsher than before. "Enter. Find the grave with no name." I pushed open the rusted iron gate, which groaned loudly, breaking the silence. The cemetery smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. The graves were scattered and uneven, some marked with wooden crosses, others with stones carved long ago. My lantern flickered as I searched for the grave. I tried not to think about the stories I'd heard, the ones about spirits that lingered, angry at being disturbed. Then I saw it. A grave with no name, its stone cracked and covered in moss. "Dig," the voice commanded. I froze. "What?" "Dig." I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking. I clawed at the dirt with my bare hands, feeling rocks and roots scrape against my skin. The deeper I dug, the colder the air became. My breaths came out in white puffs, even though it was supposed to be a warm night. Finally, I hit something hard. My fingers wrapped around a small wooden box buried beneath the soil. The moment I touched it, the voice screamed, "Leave now!" I grabbed the box and ran, stumbling over graves and tripping on roots. The wind howled behind me, and I swore I could hear footsteps chasing me. By the time I reached the gates, my chest was burning, and I felt like I had left part of myself behind. The third trial came the very next day. I was physically and emotionally drained, but the voice gave me no rest. "You must return to the shrine with the box and the calabash. There you will offer your blood." My blood? I hesitated for the first time. What if I had been wrong to trust the gods? What if they weren't going to help my parents? But when I saw their numbers that morning, 3 for Papa and 6 for Mama, I knew I couldn't stop now. I waited until nightfall and made my way back to the forest shrine. The journey felt heavier this time, like the trees were watching me. When I reached the shrine, the air was colder than before, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath my feet. I placed the calabash in the box on the altar and waited. "Open the box," the voice commanded. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside was a small knife, its blade gleaming despite the darkness. "Cut your palm and let your blood flow into the calabash," the voice said. I hesitated. "Will this save them?" "The gods keep their promises," the voice replied, though there was something in its tone that made me uneasy. I pressed the blade to my palm and winced as it sliced through my skin. Blood dripped into the calabash, pooling at the bottom. The moment the first drop hit, the ground beneath me rumbled, and the trees around the shrine began to sway violently. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked, its face hidden. It spoke in a deep, booming voice that felt like it was inside my head. "You have completed the trials, but do you understand what you have done?" I stared at the figure, confused. "I just want to save my parents." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Fate is not yours to control, child. What is taken cannot be given freely. You have angered the gods by trying to rewrite what was written." Before I could respond, the ground split open beneath the shrine. A blinding light shot out, and I was thrown backward. I screamed, shielding my eyes, but I could still see images flashing in the light, scenes from the past, present, and future. I saw my father sitting by the fire, laughing. Then I saw him lying on the ground, his body lifeless. I saw my mother crying, clutching her chest, and then I saw something worse, myself, standing in the middle of the village as it burned around me. "No!" I screamed. "This isn't what I wanted." The figure loomed over me. "You sought to save 2 lives, but in doing so, you have condemned many more." "What do you mean?" "You will see soon enough." The light faded, and I found myself lying outside the shrine, alone. The calabash and the box were gone. My hand was still bleeding, and the numbers were still above my parents' heads, 2 and 5. The next day, Papa fell ill. It came out of nowhere. He was strong one moment and collapsed the next. By the evening, he was gone. Mama's grief was unbearable, and within 3 days, she joined him. The numbers had been right all along, but the gods hadn't lied either. I had saved them, but only for a moment. Their deaths should have been quick and painless, but my interference had brought suffering. Papa's illness had been violent and painful. Mama had fallen into despair so deep that it consumed her. And the village... Strange things began happening. The river dried up overnight. Crops withered in the fields, children fell sick, and nobody could explain why. The elders whispered that the gods were angry, that someone had broken a sacred law. I kept quiet, but I knew the truth. The gods hadn't punished just me, they had punished the entire village. Now I sit alone in my parents' house, watching the numbers above everyone's heads. The numbers are always low now. People don't live long here anymore. Above my own head, I see the number 1. Tomorrow, my time will come. I don't know how it will happen, but I'm ready. I've made peace with the gods, and I've accepted that I can't change fate. If you're watching this, I hope you remember one thing. Some things are not meant to be changed. The gods watch us, and they don't forgive easily. When you see the signs, don't ignore them. Don't make the same mistake I did.